Hello, and welcome to What Am I Rolling, a twice-monthly RPG one-shot podcast. Well, normally it is. My name is Fiona, and we have come back to our little series on world building, which I'm doing whilst I sort of get my feet back on the ground after moving countries. So we're back to using the 30 Days of World Building by Angeline Trevina. And yeah, it might have been a little time since I've last done it, so we're going to do a recap at the beginning of the 5 days we've done so far. And I think what I'm going to try and do is do like 5 days for each episode, just to keep me ticking over and stuff, and so I'm not overwhelmed by stuff. So far, we have done a genre and setting. We've talked about it being like a Monster of the Week, maybe Vaesen type setting, with elements of Hunt of the Reckoning, The Between by Jason Cordova, Vampire the Masquerade, Trophy Dark, and Trophy Gold. Basically, supernatural, folk horror, urban sort of settings. We're thinking like late 1880s, maybe 1890s. There was a talk about like, oh, maybe we put it like more modern than that. But then actually I was like, it's because the reason I wanted to be that is I didn't want to have like technology and phones and all that sort of things. I think it's always more interesting to find out about the supernatural when we're not relying on like scientific and electronics. I think it's more scary as a result. I put down here sort of inspirations of sort of Buffy, Angel, maybe that investigatory sort of genre of Veronica Mars and Agent Carter. I've got Hellboy, Suicide Squad, Misfits, the TV show from Channel 4. I've written down here, the undead needed the help of the living, and fighting or violence is the last resort. So those are like the two principles I have in my head. The second day, we drew, in quotation marks, our map. And basically, I just took the Isle of Dogs map because that was just easy. And the thing I've noted here is that there was political upheaval and dock riots at the time of where we're setting this, so then in the sort of late 1800s, early 1900s. So we've got a time of like change and industrialization and transformation, which actually works in quite well with the Vaesen setting as well. So maybe if I was going to make this into like maybe a proper campaign, I'd look into the Mythic Britain and Ireland supplement for Vaesen. And maybe sort of take some of the inspirations from what source book. I know it's got a bit of a mixed response, that particular book, and I know recently it was on Quinn's Quest, Vaesen, and it got a negative review, in quotation marks, but it's a good starting point, I think, and so that's quite useful. Day 3, we've got water sources, where basically we're sort of like, where does water come into this particular area that we're creating? And obviously, because we're basing it on the Isle of Dogs, there's canal locks. I've got a note here that talks about the policing as a result and the authority on the canal waterways, because there's a lot of ways in and out to the Isle of Dogs area as a result. So that's quite interesting. Maybe we'll have some more scenes on like riverboats and canal boats and all that sort of thing. I've also made a note here about the sewer system network. And maybe as a result, crime is quite big. There's always ways in and out. Even though it is quite a small area compared to previous towns and cities that may be based in a sort of fantasy setting, I like the idea of a district or region that could have multiple ways in and out, that they're constantly, even though they're shutting down one sewer system, another one opens elsewhere, or there's another way in. So it's constantly changing, constantly a fight, almost like a fight or a tide between different sort of rising tides between the police authority that goes back down with the criminal way. So it's back and forth, this sort of fight for control. Day 4 is capital. So where is the capital? Where's the more point of power? We've got down here the governing office, the most important building that's going to be used as a setting location, perhaps. And originally I put down here somewhere on Marsh Wall, which is towards the north of the Isle of Dogs, close towards the South Dock. But I think after a lot of thinking about it, we did find out about this Folly House beach. And I like the idea of creating like a fictional house, or at least a big building that looks out on the east of the island near this beach, where the governor, whoever they may be, is there. And we sort of wrote a little notes about like they're higher than an MP, so to speak. And they have the most controlling power and decision making. We did some research about Folly House Beach, and all we found out from Google was there was litter picking. So maybe one of the many punishments is stuff to do with like picking up rubbish and litter from the beaches. Folly House is also known as the bin, with sort of language of like get in the bin, get to the bin, etc. So the marshal's office, this is where the sort of headquarters of the police are. It sounds like I've already made them like an antagonistic presence. I think that's probably wise, considering the sort of story I'd like to tell. Maybe that They are a resource or an individual sort of faction that we come up against again and again and again, and this is sort of their headquarters. Other places of note that could just come up, I just wrote down, even though they're not really part of this capital idea. We've got Oneshot Park, we've got Westbury Printworks, Island Gardens, and the various wharfs that are around this particular Isle of Dog. Again, I guess it's fantasy, isn't it? So I know I said, it's quite small, like you can walk around it in an hour. In reality, you can, but maybe in our version, it is much bigger. Again, it's just based on it, isn't it? So, yeah, the big Thames-like river is actually really, really far across, and maybe it's 3 or 4 times its size, so that we can have many different wharfs and stuff like that. Finally, we talked about landscape, and here we sort of went into the idea that the soil is very silty, there's lots of clay and mud, and there's maybe a peat layer in places. Again, the tiniest bit of research into what this place was like in the 1800s. The buildings are more sort of red brick and stone in nature, so we don't have any of that concrete, obviously, for the more modern stuff. There's a couple of wooden structures still, but not quite much. It's definitely more of a mishmash. Maybe not as high as we tend to think in London context, of like lots of very narrow, tall, wobbly buildings, etc. Certainly it's sort of set after the Fire of London, so presumably they're not building upon building houses close together per se. We've got cobbled streets, gas lamps and gas lighters. Again, that's sort of very atmospheric idea. So there's no electrical lighting here. Oneshot Park, we sort of talked about it being maybe a place where there's lots of coaches and stables and horses, so maybe a good place for like farm animals or sort of for people to come and sell cattle and all that sort of thing. There's a canal like lock in the middle where there's swans and birds that sort of hang around there. And the beaches around the edge of the isle, they're more pebbly and gritty and not like the nice sand. I did make a mention as well that across the Thames, or the river that is based on the Thames, is obviously Greenwich, which is seen as a much nicer, more upmarket. It's almost that sort of thing of like the grass is greener on the other side, that sort of idea we're going for there. Now that's our recap, and let's go to day 6, shall we? Day 6 is natural resources. People need easy access to building materials and materials for making things like pots and weapons, clothes and tools. What natural resources exist and where are they? What's closest to your capital? What needs to be shipped in from farther away? Which natural resources still exist? Which resources have been used up entirely? Are they used in a sustainable fashion? What do your people not have any access to at all? The natural resources that are used depend on more than just their availability. They are influenced by what tools and skills your population has. They are tied to other issues such as transport, economics, climate, even culture and ethics. At a base level, your natural resources can determine whether a population thrives or dies. While people move to be closer to natural resources, they also move away when those resources are depleted or no longer valued. Add markers for natural resources to your map. Forests, rocks, minerals, reeds, clay, maybe oil or volcanic rock, or even things that don't exist in our world. Now again, I come across this barrier that I've put myself in, is that I've just created an area rather than a whole world. So one of the big things that came up before was clay. So I do think there must be like a clay pit or somewhere that they are able to mine for it in some way. I think like maybe there is like a very small like quarry or mine of clay, and as a result that's where we get like pottery and bricks, maybe the beginnings of cement in some way. I think clay is going to be the biggest resources that we get. I mean, it's boring, I guess. I think ultimately the natural resources, they pale in comparison to the actual trade that happens here, because this is where the docks are, and when we're next to a big river, it's the offloading and unloading of various products and stuff like that, so they need people here. So that's why people are here. It's not necessarily because of the natural resources that are here. It just so happens that the river goes in a certain way. This is the best place for the ships and stuff like that. Maybe we have, like, I've gone on about this bloomin' Oneshot Park, right? I wonder if this is like a famous place that breeds horses in some way, uses them for Hansen cards. Maybe they are the finest horses that can pull Hansen cards and be used for any sort of transportation system in London or in this area even. So maybe that's where they originate from. they're used for some sort of royal brand or something like that. So yeah, I'll put that in as well. So the horse breeders as well, and Mudshoot Park is like the main area for it. What do we not have any access to at all? Well, I would suggest, I mean, there are going to be the odd tree or two, but maybe what about like actual places to do any harvesting or food? Like all the food is imported here. Like it's not grown here at all. So there's no natural ways to grow food here on the Isle. So one of the natural resources we talked about is this clay. Yeah, it still exists. I think there's a nice clay pit somewhere. Maybe that if you don't work at the docks, maybe you do a shift or two at the clay pit to extract the clay to make all these other products that go around the city. Are they used in a sustainable fashion? Well, I'm guessing no. Like with all quarries and mines and that sort of thing, you just kind of dig and dig and dig, and then when it's done, it's done. And then you don't do anything with it. It is just like almost like a big chunk has been taken out of the earth in some way. So I guess that's what it is. That somewhere in this isle, there is a big sort of like clay pit that they try to take as much as the stuff out of it is. And there's plenty of it, but it looks awful. It's dreadful. Maybe there's a horrible smell, etc. And it's almost like people are sad to live here because it's just grey and miserable and cloying. Is that people are covered in the stuff, and there's no way to repair or reshape the land after the extraction. And I'd go on further to say that maybe it is more industrial. Maybe there's a big factory with lots of machines nearby. It's almost like dredging it through. That's probably what it is. There's a big dredger, and it's just non-stop day and night. There's the sound of like the whistle blowing, the various steam puffing out this horrible smog. I've put down smog bellowing mechs, and actually now that I think about it, that would be quite interesting to have like almost like a steampunk type mech suit, like the one you see like Ripley using in Aliens. Maybe you could have those kind of things. It's so expensive to use, and they're very clunky and big. Obviously, we know where the horses are going to go. That's going to be Mudshoot Park. I wonder, maybe with the clay extraction, I think it's not going to be in the middle of the Isle. I think it's going to be off to one side. So maybe Island Gardens would be a good shout in the river itself. And, that could be an idea. This idea of an abscess. It's like, almost like eating itself, right? So that idea, this dredging thing on the main Thames, we've got all these dredgers and these mechs and stuff pulling out this clay, but it's made an inroad into Island Gardens itself, and it is like eating away. So it almost looks like it's biting itself into the Isle, and almost at some point may split the Isle in two. Cool. I think that's day 6. Day 7. Sapient species. What's the sapient species in your world? Is it humans? Is it only humans? Perhaps there are elves, dwarves, witches and wizards, vampires, aliens, shapeshifters. Perhaps the animals are sapient, or the plants, or the oceans. If there's more than one species, do they know about one another? Are they friends, allies? Do they respectfully keep their distance or wage war against one another? Think about the distribution of land and resources, of wealth and power. Who has what? Who has nothing? And how did they get it? I think overwhelmingly the population here is human. But I would say that maybe 15% would be the undead in some form. Now, I am not aware of any cemeteries on the Isle of Dogs. I assume there's a couple. So that is where they will sort of mostly reside. I think the most common undead would be zombie-like or reanimated corpses. We'll have ghosts and ghouls, and I think a small percentage of aquatic folklore creatures as well. Like, I'm already imagining having like a brook horse that hides itself away with the actual horses in Mudshoot Park, which would be really fun. But yeah, I think mostly human, but about 15% of the population of the Isle is undead, related in some way, majority of them being reanimated corpses, but we've got ghosts, ghouls, small aquatic folklore creatures, and thinking that those that are like traditionally like, vampires or shapeshifters or anything like that, I don't think they're here, or it's incredibly rare to have them here. I think they're in one of the other districts close by. I'm just going back to day 1 again. I think I'm going to put in another inspiration of Blades in the Dark setting. Dustfall. Because I realise now that obviously has stuff to do with ghosts. It has that sort of electropulse like gate system around it as well. So maybe that's the reason why certain creatures have not been able to come across. So anything that's in this space is local, a localised route. So people who have died here, it's all stories around here. Nothing can get across the South Dock. Probably something to do with the water. I think the water acts as a ward of some sort, trapping the dead on this isle. Which leads to an interesting thing of if, for example, a vampire was created here or trapped here for whatever reason, that's going to cause a lot of problems for us. So I like that idea of like, we can control it just now, but as soon as there's a new predator that somehow is in this enclosure, it's like a fox amongst chickens. The whole population could be changed and decimated. So what about the distribution of land and resources? So I think the dead are tightly packed into these cemeteries or into the various places where they are haunting. It's interesting because it's such a small area, and depending on how we put the dead to rest, I think it is like an ongoing war, a silent one that we don't know is happening per se, and that the undead is maybe restless in the sense of like they miss living, but they, as soon as their business is settled, that is it. So I wonder that at some point, if it builds up too much, it's like a pressure cooker, and that suddenly the undead could outnumber the living and take over, but they're not organised. It's currently all broken up. It's all sort of fractured. It's all fractured, all the support, everything like that. It's about what about me instead of what about us. All right, so yeah, overall, human mostly, but about 15% of the population of the isle is undead. And the interesting thing is that any undead on the isle is trapped here by running water, so no one can get in and no one can get out. And the living has all the power and the wealth and stuff like that because they're able to move about a bit more. But it only takes the undead to get a bit more restless that they could band together. They could unionise, there you go. They could unionise with the dock workers. Do they know each other, or do they respectfully keep their distance? I think there's a mixture of secret war in some sense, but I also suspect that maybe there is like that Britishness of like, oh, I'm undead. Oh, that's a living person. I better be careful. So I think it's more about a British respect, that British sort of politeness. All right, let's move on to day 8. Day 8. Food. What food can your characters grow, rear, or hunt? What needs to be imported? What can they afford to eat, and what is reserved for only the wealthy? Consider the seasons and the climate of your world. Consider the landscape. What food can they get when? Are they able to import out-of-season food? How do they store food? How do they harvest, catch, kill it, prepare it, and cook it? Whose responsibility is it? None of your world-building elements live in isolation of others. The issue of food is closely tied to trade, economics, gender roles. It's also important in rites and rituals, religion and festivals. There might be beliefs and superstitions, as well as polite and rude behaviour. It's possibly etiquette stuff. Make some notes about the importance of food in your world and how it affects the lives of your characters. Also, think about customs surrounding food, both everyday meals and special occasions. Ooh, a lot to think about here. So let's go for these questions in order. Can we grow food? No, we've made that clear. But we can rear animals at the park. I think whilst it's maybe horse-dominated, maybe there's the odd herd of cattle or sheep that can be reared there, and therefore we can have those farmer markets we were talking about before. Equally, I don't think there's any hunting that goes on. What needs to be imported? Well, pretty much about anything that is not to do with these sort of byproducts of cattle, sheep and pigs and horses, I think. So milk we can get, like butter we can get, but any other sort of meats, like... No, we're going about this the wrong way. So I said before that in Mudshoot Park, we talked about horses and horse rearing being the most important priority for them, because those horses get used for the Hanson cabs and they maybe have the Royal Seal of Approval. And cattle, sheep and pigs, they are reared, but they don't have as much priority. So as a result, I think a lot more food and those byproducts, while we have a little bit of it, they are at a premium. So we have to get in other byproducts of those animals imported in, and maybe they're at a subpar standard. Equally, I think the other things we get imported are basically vegetables, of all kinds and spices. Maybe the diet of a regular dweller on the Isle is quite meat heavy, and the veg and the spice, because it's so substandard what it's imported, like it's just what's left over, maybe a shipment's gone missing, etc., and then it's found. It's not great. Substandard sort of grains and gruel and stuff, and then some, like, meat is sort of 10 a penny in a way. Maybe horse meat? Question mark. What can they afford to eat? So I think there are markets and stuff. Let's say it's almost like an Aldi-inspired market. You never know what you're going to get. It is whatever's come off the ship that has been left behind, and it's more of a scrabble to get just something. So people aren't necessarily picky with what they can get. It is like a whoops aisle in an Aldi, which is wild. And I think it doesn't really matter on the seasons and the climate per se. Yeah, so it doesn't matter about how they harvest any of the food and stuff, because there's not much in terms of harvesting, but anything that is imported, it doesn't matter, I would love strawberries. Yeah, fruit is probably at a much higher premium because it's sweeter and it tastes nice compared to the veg if it's overdone or it's going off and rotting. How do they store food? I think it's just warehouses, and then anything that's cold, they're putting like underground per se. Maybe there's some salt cellars still around for preserving. Those are sort of priority for the ships and the traders that can afford that. I think if it's like a home from home type thing, yeah, there might be like a cool cellar or a basement or a hole in the ground that is like lined with stone and stuff like that to keep it cool. I've also had a thought, thinking about it, like, how do they harvest it? They don't harvest it, but catch it and kill it, prepare it and cook it. I bet there's like illegal fishing, now that I think about it, along the Thames. And that will lead us into some really interesting stories where we could pull up some eldritch horrors that sort of attack people, or mermaids or anything like that. I'm thinking of the video game Dredged at this point. Actually, I'll put that in the inspirations things. I think that was a good shout. I think then maybe if we're going on the fish route, like they illegally catch it and cook it, in a stove, stuff like that. I think everyone knows it. All the residents know how to do it. But then I'm reading this next bit about like it's important in rituals and rites, religion and festivals. Maybe there's a big sort of influence around fish. Maybe that's a symbol for something. Obviously, I know fish is a religious thing for certain cultures. So yeah, maybe there's a certain day we eat fish on. And so you see several people late at night, the day before, trying to catch something for the family dinner. Maybe there's a particular type of fish that can only be caught in the Millwall docks, just around the wharfs in general. Yeah, the outer dock, maybe something in the south dock. That'll be quite fun. That means we could play with that whole sort of thing, like give a man a fish, he eats for the day. Teach a man to fish, he'll eat for life, that sort of thing. So maybe there's some connotations and sort of worldly sort of wisdom around those sort of phrases. Ooh, what about, I'm thinking of customs now for like weddings. So, when it's like, oh, it's this anniversary, it's your paper anniversary, it's your diamond anniversary. What if the wedding anniversaries were based on fish? Happy place anniversary. And as a result, you have to have that supper with your beloved that night to have good luck for the rest of the year for your anniversary. Yeah, I like that. Oh, I love that. I'd say then as well that there maybe is a dedicated fish market just off the Isle. I mean, there is a market in the real world. Billingsgate, I think it's called. So maybe there's a fish market nearby. Oh, wait, okay. What if there's a floating fish market? Like an actual dock that is out on the River Thames. Yes, let's have that. I like that. Let's do that. Again, could be run by criminals, and then maybe there's police raids and all sorts. Yes, I like it. I like it. What about polite and rude behaviour? I think I've got stuff to go on. I didn't think fish would come into it, I'll be honest, but I like this idea now. Oh, sleep with the fishes. Of course, that would be another phrase to say, wouldn't it? Maybe it's not as ominous as we think it is now. I can't think of anything to do with etiquette per se, but I wonder if you really want to hammer home the fish stuff, maybe everyone who lives on this isle, at some point, whether they get a job promotion or as a moving in gift, they get their own special fish knife and fork. Nice. Yeah, I think that's enough. So the food we have, right, so we know that there's going to be farmers markets near Mudshoe Park that have a very small amount of cattle and pigs and sheep that we can sell to people. Maybe, let's put goats in as well. So we do have some farm creatures, but they're not widely spread. As a result, we have to import quite a lot of our food and the byproducts of animals through the trading things. Veg and spice is another thing. Fruit is certainly at a premium because it makes things taste nicer. There are like markets around the docks, but because we can't really tell what comes in and when, they are almost like Aldi Whoops aisles. Like we don't know what's coming, and it's going to be the cheapest of the cheap, and some of it is just not going to be tasty at all. We've got some cold storage that's underground probably in every house, and those slightly more well-off probably have salt cellars. But anything like that is mostly priority for the wealthy merchants around the docks, as they need stuff preserved for a long period of time. What we've discovered, though, is that there's most likely to be illegal fishing along the river on the outskirts of the Isle. Specific fish can be caught in the docks, in the Millwall Outer Dock and the South Dock, and there's certain phrases like teach a man to fish, he'll eat for life, that sort of thing, or sleeping with the fishes, which is maybe more positive than we think. I don't know. This idea of gifting fish-related cutlery or things to help you eat fish, so like a fish knife of some sort. Having the wedding customs based on fish rather than like arbitrary objects, and on every anniversary, if you eat the fish that's part of that anniversary, you'll have good luck for the rest of the year in that partnership, which I love. Maybe then as a result, every business meeting you have is ideally that you have fish in some sort. And we sort of, the big thing is that we've made a floating fish market. Maybe that moves up and down the Thames in some way. It's almost like a hub floating, which is clearly run by some sort of criminal gang, but there's regular police raids on it. So you can, on a Sunday or so, go out on your rowboat to join that sort of floating fish market to see if there's any unusual fish types that you might be looking for. Nice. I think that's great, actually. I didn't think we'd go that way. Day 9 is farmed animals. So which animals are domesticated and farmed? How are they farmed? What are they farmed for? Is it meat, milk, skin, something else? How are they farmed? Look back at your map and think about the space a particular animal needs. Do they need acres of grazing land or just a small pen? Do they need particular plants to eat or a particular kind of landscape? Can they survive in extreme heat, cold, or other weather conditions where other animals can't? Can your characters also survive in that landscape? All animals that are domesticated are chosen for a reason. For their uses, for their ease of domestication. Large, naturally vicious animals may be farmed, but it's less likely they'll be curling up by the kitchen fire. So consider what makes sense in your world and to your characters, especially if you're bringing in the element of mythical and fantastical creatures. Make some notes about domesticated and farmed animals. Think also about animal welfare. Are the animals used for food, viewed as little more than raw materials, or are they worshipped and revered? Which animals are kept as pets, and why those animals in particular? Man, I keep thinking I've already answered some of these questions with previous answers, but that's okay. So, we've talked about it before that near Mudshoot Farm there are these farmer markets, which sells animals like such as cattle, sheep, pigs and goats to presumably households for meat. So that is the thing. They are farmed for their byproducts and stuff. I think skin as well probably be something. But I think, unfortunately, I've put them in an area where they're not going to be happy organically put about. I think, unfortunately, they are seen little more than raw materials. The only animal that probably does well out of it is fish, because they're not necessarily farmed. They're out and about in the rivers and in the docks. That answers quite a bit of it. Can they survive extreme heat, cold, or other weather conditions? I wonder, because it's London-based, the smog and that sort of maybe poisonous, smoky sort of things probably doesn't do them very well. So I'm sure we have the odd death or two. But again, I like the idea that there are other creatures that hide or replace them in the fog that cause havoc as well, like almost like vase and S type things. Like I talked about the brook horse before, so maybe it's the same sort of thing. I do think, like, animals kept as pets, I think foxes and maybe ravens. The reason I think ravens is because you can use them. They're very smart creatures. I think you use them as a way of like communication and stuff. So if everyone has a raven, then that's an easy way to get post that's not necessarily by any post office or anything like that. We've not established if there is some sort of postal service on this isle. I can imagine if any messages and stuff needs to be done quickly, that it's better to have your own raven or have a place to have ravens come and visit you. So that's why I think it's a way to have that sort of narrative. And I think foxes probably do quite well here. There's lots of food, there's lots of warm space and stuff. So I don't think they're necessarily domesticated. I just think they're around And they're very friendly. They're very used to humans. They sort of just come up and try and be stroked and stuff like that, even though they're probably covered in fleas and stuff and a bit dirty. But they're probably more of a common sight. So that's what I'd say about domesticated, that they're not pets, but they're still wild animals, but they have a bit more of a roamable land compared to maybe cats and dogs. I have a sneaking suspicion there's not many cats and dogs on the Isle itself. Maybe there's the odd one or two, but I do think the majority of animals that you would see would be foxes. Maybe I'm thinking of foxes as a sort of like, they're more of a pest, but in the sense of like when you see a cat in your garden and it's like ruining your flowers, it's that kind of thing where you know it clearly belongs to somebody or it's just got the confidence to do that. Ooh, so thinking about the smog stuff, maybe the animals then have to be kept indoors. Maybe if they're led out into the farmers' markets and sort of paraded around, maybe they have to wear a mask on their face so that they don't breathe in any toxic fumes. Maybe everyone has masks or handkerchiefs or something like that. And maybe there's a way to say, oh, this has not been smogged at all. Smog-free cattle and goats and pigs. So that's maybe like a quality of life and value factors into the price point. I appreciate this is not very good for the animals. But again, it's not really the focus of the stories I'd like to tell. But yeah, it's a bit sad. Day 10 is natural predators. Every place comes with its dangers, but generally the pros should outweigh the cons. Is it worth losing a few goats to mountain lions if the ground is rich and fertile and the river brimming with fish? Can your people keep the wolves in the woods at bay with a regular sacrificial lamb? Or perhaps the wolf pelts are so sought after on the other side of the mountain and fetch such a high price that it's worth losing a hunter or two each year. How is the balance between predator and prey maintained? Remember, once you change one thing in an ecosystem, everything else changes too. Wipe out a natural predator, and you might be overrun with their prey. Introduce a new predator, and you might introduce a new disease that wipes out your cattle. So be careful with the natural world. Make some notes about natural predators and the ways that they are controlled. Interesting. I'm going to change this slightly. I'm going to say it's unnatural predators instead, rather than natural ones, because I don't think there's any natural... Everything is controlled in this particular area by the humans. They're controlling like the animals that come in, etc. I think the only thing it would be those foxes, but there's no real natural threat about that. Maybe there is some sort of pest control, perhaps, but once you get rid of one, you know what? There's probably rats as well. There's going to be loads of rats around. I think though for unnatural predators, any of the undead would be a worthwhile option. Like I said, it's not something that is fast acting in terms of like vampirism or zombies, etc. Anything that happens, they are dead or consumed, and it's more out of fear as a last resort that something has happened, and it's usually in self-defense, I think. But maybe they're seen as the predators. We have the Penny Dreadfuls, we have the stories about like another man missing, found in the river with his head lopped off, that sort of stories that we see in the local gazette, perhaps. This is around the time of Jack the Ripper and all that sort of thing, so we could have similar things, because that's kind of like a natural predator in a way of humans, is serial killers, right? Right. The other way to think about this, and maybe again it's just going down this dark path, is that the police force, they're kind of predators in a sense. They beat up on the vulnerable and the weak, and maybe take away livelihoods, etc., from people just trying to make an honest buck and then being crushed by the system. So that's a line of inquiry, so to speak. We can investigate for sure. But why live here? I think that's what it's asking. Why live here? Well, there is good work to be done here. Like, you could support people. Like, dock work, whilst not the greatest in the world, back-breaking and all that sort of thing, there's a lot of work going around. And if you do more jobs, you get more money, and it's enough to bring stuff on the table. You could also join the police force as well. They're always asking for sign-ups. And maybe it's just the fact of being near a capital where just across the waterway there are shows, there are entertainment, there's like the life of this place. It feels alive. And so maybe living in a region of the dead, it doesn't matter too much. Maybe it's a desirable place to be. You know what it is, actually? It's probably an up-and-coming place, as they always used to say. The Isle, it's always up-and-coming. Especially as you've seen, like, Greenwich is across the way. Again, it's like, one day we will be like that. So I think this place has a lot of potential, and people want to be there first and have always been there and be seen as residents, as well as there being work. Maybe there's good schools as well. Maybe good, maybe not schools, but like apprenticeships. So like if people want to get into helping out with a farmer's market or into the dock work, like there are lots of apprenticeships, there's lots of people working. There's no worry of like being without. You've always got stuff. So it's a bit tricky because, yeah, the natural world, obviously, I appreciate what the prompt is trying to tell me. Is like, oh, what about animals? But I'm like, oh, no, there's humans here. It is a small urban place. But I think that's an answer for something. That's at least something to think about. All right, so that is another 5 prompts done. We've done natural resources, we've done sapient species, we've done food, we've done farmed animals and natural predators. Overall, I like what we've done. I really enjoyed the food prompt. That actually made me think quite a bit because I hadn't really thought about how important food is to certainly a place like this, but also like, what we're getting. Does it figure into customs and like, it's important in rituals and religion, and what does it mean for everyday food and for special occasions? So I was like, oh yeah, I really like that prompt as a result. I feel like the other ones, I feel like I've cheated this guide a little bit because I've gone, no, it's urban. Maybe it's meant to be a fantasy making of some sort, but I feel like I've given answers for everything. I will say, going back to the food thing, I do love the idea of the floating fish market now. Like all I can think about is Dredge the video game. I do like the idea of like, what is the sapient species? Like, again, a very simple answer for us, but thinking about like, oh, well, do people know about it? If they do about it, are they friends? Are they allies? Or is there a war between them of some sort? So I quite like that, having a think about what remains on the Isle compared to outside, and is it better or worse as a result? So yeah, I thought those were quite good. But that's it. That's all we're going to do for this episode of What Am I Rolling? I'll come back in a couple of weeks' time. I'm going to do another couple. We're going to try and do all 30 days as well. And be sure to listen back to the other one if you're not sure. And then by the end, we'll do a big old recap. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon? ? Okay. Thank you so much, friends. Bye.